The top 12 running backs in fantasy this year were Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan, Henry, Kamara, Achane, Taylor, Jacobs, Mixon, Kyron, James Cook, Kenneth Walker. If you notice something with these running backs, they're old, right? I mean, you can go through and you can see that the best fantasy asset by a mile last season, Saquon Barkley, 27-year-old running back. Derrick Henry, 30-year-old running back, arguably the best year of his NFL career. Alvin Kamara, 29-year-old running back. Joe Mixon, 28-year-old running back. And we are seeing this trend now where these running backs are lasting longer and longer than we are expecting, where I myself, and really the entire fantasy community, we've been coming out and saying for years now, oh yeah, running backs fall off after 27. And now the entire tone has shifted in the Dynasty community, where I read my comments, of course, and a lot of y'all, other than saying I'm stupid, which I am, are going through and saying, oh, okay, well, it's just new science technology. It's the fact that you have athletes like LeBron James investing millions of dollars into their body every offseason, and all of a sudden, the results are paying off, and these athletes are able to stay relevant longer and longer and longer. I have a little bit of a different perspective, and I have a different hypothesis with these RBs. What I really want to look at is the new growth of talent at the running back position over the past 4 years, because we can kind of remember that, yeah, I guess we haven't had a really good running back draft class in a while, but when you get into the exact details of how bad the recent running backs have been, it's shocking. Where we can go through, and we all remember the 2024 draft, right? I mean, this was just last season, where the best prospect is a running back that we don't get to see test at the NFL Combine. He plays 1 year at Texas, and he's coming into the NFL with a torn ACL, which he immediately destroys his knee right when he starts playing with Jonathan Brooks. Realistically, you look at that prospect profile, where would Jonathan Brooks be ranked in the 2025 crop of rookie running backs that we are getting? You go through, and the only other running backs that were drafted inside the first 3 rounds were Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Marshawn Lloyd, and this isn't just a this year type situation. We go back to 2023 in terms of decent prospects. You had 2 great ones, right? Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, elite level prospects, and really you only have 1 running back in this year's class that can profile to be similar to what they were. But outside of that, you really don't have much depth in this class. You have a later hit coming with Devon Achane in 2022. You have Breece Hall up at the top of the 2nd round. I think we can all agree Breece was a phenomenal prospect. Then you had Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Rashad White, Tyrion Davis-Price, Brian Robinson. Really only 3 running backs here that can command fully starting jobs at the NFL level. And in 2021, the only guys to go in the first 3 rounds were Najee, Etienne, Javonte, Trey Sermon, arguably all of whom have proven to be nothing and ultimately washed out after maybe having a starting job for a few years and doing very little with it. So if you go through and if you look at the last 4 draft classes that we have had, let's just account for the running backs that have been able to say, yes, they're full locked and loaded starters, and you don't have to worry about competition in their respective backfields. You had Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, maybe Najee Harris. You've had like 7 running backs over the past 4 years. This has been just an absolute disaster. And I think that this is a big reason why we are beginning to see a lot of these running backs just stay around the NFL longer and longer with feature roles, where you're not seeing a running back like Alvin Kamara have to split a backfield with Kondre Miller because Miller's not any good. Where if you look at what we have with this 2025 draft class, now, I am very excited to get NFL Combine numbers. We've recently loaded up all these 2025 rookie prospects onto the prospects page on flockfantasy.com. Or definitely go check out all that information. You can see exactly how good all these rookies are stacked up to previous classes. Also on flockfantasy.com, I recently updated our dynasty rankings, both for Superflex and 1 quarterback leagues. Plus, we still have the trade calculator, trade finder. You can link your dynasty team with flockfantasy.com for completely free on the My Teams page. I'll leave a link to the site down in the description and comment section. And of course, if you use code FLOCK, you'll get 30% off any subscription. Plus, with an annual Mother Flocker tier, I'll actually dive into your Dynasty Fantasy Football team with the podcast and come up with some moves that I think could improve your roster. But if you look at this draft class, which we'll dive in deep with this class later in the year, especially now that they're on the site, we have Ashton Genty, Hampton, Johnson, Henderson, Judkins, Scatterbo, Gordon, Neal, Sampson. This is ultimately a list of about 10 running backs that have a shot to go inside the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Really, with only Genty being the round 1 prospect. Genty's the only guy that you can possibly compare to the Bijan Gibbs level prospects coming out. But more importantly, you have a handful of running backs that can contend for starting jobs or push some of these older running backs actually into committees. And I think that this is a big year where maybe it's not the best idea to be buying running backs in February. Maybe it's not the best idea to be buying running backs in March, where there are going to be a lot of moving pieces. And unlike last offseason, where there was nothing in the NFL draft, I think that these guys are actually going to take some jobs or turn some jobs into committees. Now, of course, I do think you have to be concerned with some of the really good young running backs that don't have a lot invested into them. The guys like Chase Brown that maybe we'll talk about in a different video. But what I want to focus in on here is these older running backs that just kind of won leagues and figure out what realistically is the range of outcomes for them now that they're another year older. Because these are the guys, if you bought into last offseason, you 100% would have crushed. So with McCaffrey, obviously, it's very difficult to come out here and go, okay, well, we know that this is what we should expect this next year. We didn't get an age 28 season, right? We have nothing to go off of. We can really go back to his age 27 season. We can say that he is a straight up league winner when healthy. But what is interesting is when you see some of these running backs get injured later in their NFL careers, how often are they actually able to bounce back and have that league winning type season? Not going to spend a lot of time with McCaffrey. We don't have too many data points to look at. The only thing I do want to point out is if you actually go through and look at running backs to average more than 16 points per game in their age 29 season, these are great running backs like Brian Westbrook, Alvin Kamara, Tomlinson, McCoy, Sproles, Priest Holmes. You have phenomenal running backs on this list, right? You have a couple Hall of Famers in here. None of them missed their age 28 season with an injury. We have yet to see a running back at 29 come back from a year where he pretty much missed the entire season at 28. Now, of course, McCaffrey could be the first to do that. I'm not saying that he won't be. I more so want to focus in on the running backs later in this video where we actually have the data to prove this up. Now, going over and looking at Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, we saw Cincinnati get out of his contract and decide to move with Chase Brown last year. Probably a good move from Cincinnati's perspective, right? Especially when you're having to pay Burrow that deal. And he finds himself in Houston, has himself a phenomenal season in comparison to what the expectations were with where he was getting drafted. And Joe Mixon in that 2017 class, same class as Kamara, same class as McCaffrey, was extremely young coming out of OU. He was the youngest running back in that draft class getting drafted at 20 years old. So he still only played his age 28 season this past year. And we go back to this past season, at 29, Kamara balled, right? At 30, you had Derrick Henry being a league winner. Well, if we actually look at the historical comps that we have for Joe Mixon, in terms of the age 28 seasons with running backs that were most similar with their rushing attempts per game, rushing yards a game, receiving yards per game, and receptions per game, the list includes some very good running backs. You have guys like Marshawn Lynch, you have DeMarco Murray, you have Chris Johnson, you have LaShawn McCoy, you have Joe Mixon, you have Derrick Henry. You have a bunch of great running backs on this list, right? Joe Mixon is a great running back. What's very interesting to note is every single one of the comps for Joe Mixon out of the 9 closest, they got worse the following season. LaShawn McCoy at 28 years old averaged 19.9 fantasy points per game. That fell to 16.6. Curtis Martin averaged about 18.8 fantasy points per game. That fell down to about 14.9. Derrick Henry was 20.1, then down to 14.1, then blew up because he went to Baltimore. We'll talk about that later. Marshawn Lynch from 19.1 down to 11.8. DeMarco Murray from 18.5 down to 11.6. Jamal Lewis from 16.7 down to 10.3. Chris Johnson 15.3 down to 7.3. Corey Dillon 15.4 down to 6.5. Now, Joe Mixon starting off at 18.2, right in the middle of all these running backs. History says he is going to decline going into his age 29 season. You combine that with the fact that you actually have a deep, really talented running back class coming in here in this 2025 class. Probably a decent idea to go ahead and hit the reset button. Derrick Henry puts up one of the best age 30 running back seasons we've ever seen for fantasy football. Going back to the year 2000, here are the only running backs to have a better season than Derrick Henry from a points per game perspective. Priest Holmes, Tiki Barber, Charlie Garner, Fred Jackson, Marshall Faulk. Phenomenal running backs. I think at this point we can say that Derrick Henry is going to end his career as a Hall of Fame level running back. He's sitting at 106 total career rushing touchdowns. That's tied with Jim Brown. This next season, he's going to have more than 4 rushing touchdowns. He'll leapfrog Walter Payton, and the only running backs with more rushing touchdowns will be Emmitt Smith, LT, Marcus Allen, and Adrian Peterson. He'll be a top 5 running back all time in rushing touchdowns. Derrick Henry is a beast, very similar to other Hall of Fame running backs on this list. Say Adrian Peterson, right? Adrian Peterson's one of the 30-year-old running backs that average more than 16 points per game. just like Derrick Henry did. Marshall Faulk, another running back, phenomenal, averaged more than 16 points per game, just like Derrick Henry did. Priest Holmes, great running back. I mean, we can go through the entire list here again. But what's very interesting is if we look at the 12 running backs that in their age 30 season averaged 16 points per game or more, which Derrick Henry just did, only 7 of the 12 were able to stay healthy and play more than 10 games the following year. What we've historically seen is we've seen the injury rate go up dramatically for running backs at 31 years old. And then again, all these running backs average 16 points per game or more at 30. There were only 3 to average 15 points per game or more the following season. Those 3 running backs to average more than 15 points per game were Priest Holmes, who only played 8 games. He was not able to stay healthy. Tiki Barber, that played all 16, and he produced very well. And Corey Dillon, who averaged about 17.4, but he was only able to play 11 games. So really, if you say the running backs that lasted all season healthy and averaged more than 15 points per game, there's 1. Not to say that Derrick Henry can't do it, but I do think that the narrative now that age doesn't matter for the running back position may not be the worst idea to go ahead and get out of them. We'll talk about prices at the end of this video and what I'm exactly looking to sell these guys for. I'm going over and looking at Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara at 29, obviously very unique situation. I know a lot of people got upset with us ranking Alvin Kamara low in our last rankings video. A lot of people were saying, how is he below Joe Mixon? One comment was funny, saying he was the same age as Mixon, blah, blah, blah. Produced better than Mixon. All lies. I mean, Joe Mixon, a year younger than Kamara. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, if you are looking at Alvin Kamara, a big concern that you have is the New Orleans Saints could be the worst team in the NFL this next year. There's not a clear path for this Saints team to come through and say, yeah, we're not tanking. We know that we are going to have a good offense. And Kamara had great comps at 29 years old. You have Marshall Faulk, Matt Forte, LT, Brian Westbrook, LaShawn McCoy. I mean, phenomenal running backs here. But if you actually look at what they did their next season, every single one got worse. Every single guy got worse at 30. Marshall Faulk stayed about the same from about 20.6 points per game down to 20.2, but then everybody else got much worse. Matt Forte from 22 points per game down to about 16.5. LT from 17.5 points per game down to about 13. Amon Green from 16.1 down to 10.7. Brian Westbrook from 19.4 down to 10.3. LaShawn McCoy from 16.6 down to 9.1. Michael Pittman from 17.9 down to 7.6. Alvin Kamara starting at 19. We'll see what the drop-off is, but the historical data says every single one of these guys is going to decline. And again, with Kamara, you don't have to be worried about the Saints going through and taking Ashton Jeanty in round 1 by any means, but you possibly have to be worried about them taking a running back in round 3 and in a much better draft class. That guy's not Kondre Miller, and that guy actually splits the backfield with Kamara in a very bad offense. Going over and looking at James Conner. James Conner, you do have one running back that had a similar age 29 season that got better the next year. That was Derrick Henry, the transition from Tennessee to Baltimore. Derrick Henry was the one guy this past season that was able to break this trend, which is why I think a lot of people are looking at that outlier scenario and all of a sudden thinking that these guys are going to last into their age 30 season, and why we are looking to sell. And what we can actually do to look to sell is if you go over to flockfantasy.com and you go to the rankings page, you can actually see every exact rookie pick with where they are ranked up alongside these running backs. So if you actually look at the updated price that you have for a lot of these veteran RBs, Christian McCaffrey would be going for a late first. In my mind, in a Superflex league, I would very easily sell McCaffrey for anything with the 108 or above. Derrick Henry is right around the price point of the 111. I think if you can get a top 10 pick for Derrick Henry, I'm cashing out. Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, I think if you can get any 2026 first or any pick above pick 111 for them, I'm completely fine cashing out as well. And then James Conner, if I can get any future first, I'm done. I'm wiping my hands. And I mean, these average rankings are from a lot of creators that I know a lot of people like, the guys at Fantasyland, the guys at a Domain Dynasty, the guys at Fantasy Stock Exchange, and myself included. But I don't know. I just think that when you're in the month of February, it is so much safer to decide to move out from these declining assets, because realistically, from today to the NFL draft, what could possibly happen to increase a player's value like Joe Mixon? What could possibly happen to increase a player's value like Alvin Kamara? Please let me know in the comment section. Whereas I know a lot of things that can make that value worse. I know a lot of things that could improve the value of these rookie picks. So I'm going to be overweight dynasty rookie picks early in the offseason, as we always are, because that is the safe bet on an accruing asset where you don't have to worry about any landmines hitting during the NFL draft, particularly at the running back position when you do have a year where you have a lot of competition coming in. But I think that's all I got for you. Again, if you have any questions about these running backs, please drop a comment. It's just very interesting because, again, the older running backs are the running backs who won leagues because you got them at that discount last year, given their age. But the thing about age is they're not getting younger. Now they are a year older, and you do have to sit here and reevaluate them. But appreciate you, and really hope we get to see you in the next video.